Welcome to the Refurbishment Mastery podcast with me, Martin Rapley. If you're a property investor who is worried about paying too much for your next property, concerned that you don't know how to manage a refurb, or scared that you will be ripped off by a builder, then this is for you. In this podcast, I share over 30 years of experience of managing refurbishments and conversions to help you make more profit, save your time, and ultimately enjoy the process. On with the podcast. So members of my community regularly talk to me about the process of splitting services, and then are actually really surprised that it's nowhere near as simple as the phrase splitting services sounds. So I thought I would go into that in a little bit more detail in this episode so that there's an understanding for everyone. And genuinely, this is not quite as simple as it sounds. And I think, unfortunately, there's a lot of property trainers out there that are also not aware that the process that sounds really simple of splitting services is expensive and can take quite a little bit of time to actually get in place. And by time, we could be talking, 3 to 4 months, and in some cases, even more than that. So let me unpack all of this and help you understand what you need to consider, and importantly, what you need to budget for doing these kinds of works. So we talk about splitting services in several different contexts. The first one might be that we are splitting titles of existing properties. So let's say we've got a property that sometime in the past has been carved up into 4 flats, possibly 1 flat on each floor. A big mansion from its day has been split up into 4 flats. But we find that these flats are still working on a main supply, possibly mains gas, mains electrics, mains water, or all of those. Any combination of those are still just supplying. So there's just one supply coming into the property. And if we want to split the title so that we can effectively sell or refinance every single flat in its own entity, then as part of splitting the titles from a paperwork exercise, we also need to split the services. So there's a lot of those properties out there. In fact, I own one of those properties. I've got a property where it's got 3 flats in it, but 2 of them are still working off just one heating and hot water system. So there's one gas supply coming in that feeds 2 of those flats at the moment. And at some point that will be regularized as part of a refurbishment that I'm going to do. But there's lots of those properties around. So we do it we split services in conjunction with splitting titles where we've got multiple units. Now, we also talk about splitting services if we've, say, got a current single house and we want to split that up into multiple flats. So effectively just the earlier stage of what I was talking about just now. We're going to do it from scratch. We're going to refurbish, and we are going to split the services so that now one service coming into the building can be used over multiple flats. So again, flats is the common denominator here, by the way. Not always, but nearly always flats. And then, of course, in connection with commercial units, we may take a commercial unit and split that up into multiple flats as well. Or indeed, more commonly, I'm speaking to a lot of people that are taking a commercial unit that perhaps is a shop with some storage to the rear, or shop with some storage on a floor above. And we still want to keep the shop at the front on the ground floor as we've got, but for the longer term, we want to create some residential from it as well. So this still relates if we're splitting a commercial building into something that is mixed commercial and residential. And this is really when we want to ensure that the 2 three, four, five, however elements of the building we've got can operate under their own supplies. Effectively, each resident, each tenant will get their own bills for their own use of gas, water, and electric going forward, rather than you as the owner of the whole building getting one bill and then having to agree a way of splitting that with the different tenants, the different owners, the different occupiers of the building, depending on what you've got here. Now, I've mentioned a couple of times that we're talking here about gas, water, and electrics. It's very common not to split the gas. It's very common to leave gas. If you've just got one lot of gas coming into a property, it's very common to actually leave that gas coming into that one property and actually heat water and provide space heating for the remaining properties using electric. So we don't normally split the services as far as gas goes. We normally change those services and use electric to power those instead. Now, the phrase that everyone uses, the phrase that I use, the phrase that everyone understands is splitting services. But I have to say, the term splitting services is actually completely wrong. It is not physically possible to split the services that you've got in your existing building. So there's two elements that we need to consider here. First of all, we've got a supply coming into our building, and it doesn't matter which one we're talking about, gas, water, or electrics. We have got a supply coming into our building, and within the building, we've then got a distribution that snakes itself around the building in one way or another. And depending on how modern the installation is, how many previous alterations there's been, how many previous repairs there've been, that may or may not be a fairly logical arrangement. For instance, it may come in, it may go round the property in a nice clockwise direction and then go effectively connect up on the way out again, depending on what we're doing. Electrics connects up as a circuit, water tends to distribute a little bit more like a tree. So now, if the building is pretty much as built, that may well be quite logical. But what you can see now is if we take something that perhaps, let's take the water, which comes up from a supply, perhaps on the ground floor, and goes up and comes off at different levels into different parts of the property, what we can now understand is that the same pipes are connected at multiple levels. And therefore, if we just split those pipes later on, when we come to split the building vertically, say, actually, I think that would be horizontally. We would split horizontally so that we've got a flat on each floor. Then now we've got pipes that may go from one flat to another flat, but we don't necessarily know what goes where unless we pull the whole building to pieces. And of course, if we engage a plumber to do those alterations, the first thing the plumber's going to say is, well, if you want me to guarantee this work, I need to know where all of this pipe work comes from. I need to know that it's all in good condition. I need to know that it's not going to fail the week after I finish my work. I need to know that these old pipes aren't very close to the end of their life. So any single plumber wanting to work on that is immediately going to say, we need to rip out everything that's there and we need to start from scratch. And indeed, the electricians are going to say exactly the same to you, because there's going to be cables that snake around all over the place. There's light fittings in the ceiling for the room downstairs that could very easily come up through the floor and circle somewhere in the next floor up, possibly even connected to the lighting upstairs. There could be some two-way lighting on the staircase. There's power sockets where someone's modified the power in the past, and the easiest place to get power in the dining room wasn't to come through from the dining room or from the living room next door. It was actually to come down from the bedroom upstairs, because that's where it was the easiest to connect to. So again, the electricians are going to say, I can't modify what's here. It's just not logical. It's been modified over the years. It's going to fail testing. I can't guarantee it. We need to rip the whole lot out. And if it would be exactly the same with gas as well, if we were going to change the gas as well. So we end up in this situation where actually everything within the house now has to be ripped out. No plumber, no electrician is going to uh, approve to guarantee that work unless they've taken everything out and replaced everything with new. And indeed, if you're creating additional units, then you're going to be in a position where you need to provide a structural warranty. And unless you've got the very basic structural warranty, you will need to actually um, demonstrate that you've got new services in there. The very basic structural warranties don't go that into that much depth, but most people actually want more than the basics. So we've got a position where everything within the property now needs to be replaced. So we're not splitting anything in the property, we're ripping it all out and we're starting again. So we had a big house that we want to split up into multiple flats. Um, we could have rewired the whole house. Rewiring the whole house might have cost us something like £7,000, 8,000, depending on the size of the house. Splitting that and rewiring it into multiple flats is probably somewhere in the region of 2,800, £3,000 a flat, maybe a bit cheaper in some cheaper parts of the country, smaller, simpler flats. But what you can see now is it's going to cost us more to create 3 or 4 flats from the big house than it would have done of just replacing the electrics in the big house. Because we've now got a distribution board, a consumer unit for each individual flat, and circuits relating to each individual flat. Whereas, so for a flat, we may well have a lighting circuit, a power circuit, we might have a cooker circuit, we may have a circuit for a fire alarm system and things like that. So we could have 4 or 5 circuits depending on the size of the flat. Whereas with a house, we might have had some multiple circuits in there, but the whole lot goes back into one distribution board. So we've got first thing to consider is within the house, we are now putting in brand new supplies for the current specification for electrics and for water. Putting in new water supplies isn't that costly. We've got to run a new mains distribution up through the property, ideally in as straight a line as we can, and then teeing off. But from the ground floor, we will have multiple pipes. We'll have a pipe going up for every single flat. We won't have one pipe going up with branches coming off. And that will become clear shortly when I talk about the next thing that we need to consider here. And so that rerunning those pipes isn't necessarily an enormous expense. It's going to be less than £1,000 a unit. But of course, once we got those pipes up into the flats, we've then got to connect up to what we've got there, which could mean connecting up to boilers, connecting up to wash hand basins, kitchen sinks, baths, showers, those kinds of things, depending on the installation you've got there. Now, so that's everything with inside our buildings. But we've also got to consider that we've got to consider what happens outside our building, because at the moment, we've got one electric supply coming in, or one water supply coming in, or possibly one gas supply coming in. And what we actually need, if we've got 4 flats, we need 4 supplies coming in, because we want to know that each flat has got its own dedicated supply with a meter out on the front wall, out in the street, wherever the meters are going to go, for each individual unit. So we now need 4 electric supplies and 4 water supplies. In fact, we may actually need 5 electric supplies, because if we've got a communal staircase, we may well have a landlord supply for the lighting up there, possibly the fire alarm. for the whole building, maybe some heating in there as well. Uh, so we could very easily need, if we've got 4 flats, we could very easily need 5 electric supplies. And if we've got 4 flats, we're likely to need 4 water supplies. Now, we've already got 1 electric supply and 1 water supply. So the existing supply can be modified, and perhaps the electrics becomes the landlord supply, and perhaps the water becomes the water supply to flat 1. But we're now going to need 4 new electric supplies coming into the building and 3 new water supplies coming into the building, which means that we need to talk to our local electric distribution company, a local water supply company, and they need to give us quotes for connecting up out in the street, under the pavement, wherever that supply is. Digging a hole in the road, in the pavement, to make a new connection, and then running new pipes or new cables through your front garden and into your property, where they can then connect up with the new supplies and the new services that we've put in internally. Now, the work within your driveway, within your front garden, can actually be done by your builder. The builder can lay the water pipes, get those approved and signed off, but there's still a connection out in the street that needs to be done by the water company. Normally, your builder will quite often end up putting a duct in the ground, and then the electric supply company will normally feed the cables up through that duct, um, into your property, and connect up inside your property. Now, the cost for doing that work is very, very hard to ascertain. It really depends on not just how far you are away from the connection point, it's also where that connection point is. Is it under the pavement right outside your garden gate? Is it in the road? Is it actually in the pavement on the other side of the road? And depending on where it is, the logistics and therefore the cost of that connection can actually make quite a big difference, particularly if the road is busy and the only way to get a connection is to actually put in temporary traffic lights and dig a hole in the road. You can imagine the cost of that, and that cost will be passed on to you. And when I said at the start of this that there can be a time impact in all of this, if that needs traffic management, some local authorities will say, depending on where it is, some local authorities will say you can only do that work, say, during the school summer holidays, or during a weekend or something like that. And it has to be coordinated with some other works that are going on elsewhere, so that we haven't got too many temporary traffic lights in place, or we've got all of the disruption within a certain window. So yes, everyone gets really annoyed about it, but at least it's all confined to a short-term window. So, and that's where time can suddenly disappear. So normally the process to make an application to your local supplier, water, gas, or electric, and you'll normally get a quote back within 10 days or so, sometimes even quicker than that. They get turned around quite quickly. The process to get yourself in the system is normally up to 3 months. But if the system says, well, we can't allow you to have the road closure, have the temporary traffic lights, have whatever you need straight away, that can very easily be more. Yeah, as I say, particularly if you've got to coincide with school holidays or other works. So we've got quite a time constraint here as well. The cost of doing these connections really is a question: how long is a piece of string? It is very hard to put a firm price or even a good budget against these works. I tend to say it starts at £2,000 per service per flat. So if we've got a water and electric for 1 flat, that's effectively £4,000. That you could have some lucky breaks and it comes in a bit cheaper, but you could also be really unlucky and find it's a lot more money. So don't be at all surprised if it can get quite expensive at this point. So the key thing to remember here is we've got two elements. We're not just splitting services. We are bringing in whole new elements, and we are distributing whole new elements. So we need to budget for the new services to come in. We need to budget for the complete rewire, the complete replumbing of the properties we've got to suit the new layout that we've got. And we need to consider the time associated with all of that. Time from time to bring in new services, and of course, time for modifying or bringing it, rewiring, reconfiguring, replumbing what we've got there and what we're creating. Now, the only other option you've got here, if you don't want to do all of that, if all of that starts to sound really complicated and too expensive, the only other option you've got really is to install check meters into the services you've got. Now, depending on how those services have been run, that might be quite an easy job. However, I suggest if it is an easy job, it probably would have been done already, or you've just got to accept that the whole property needs to stay on the same services. And that in reality is why in the property I've got, where the hot water and gas supply all comes from one boiler, the reason that's not been split is because it's not a 5-minute job. It's not easy to put in check meters. The service is not a straightforward service, so it's never been done. And to be honest, when I bought the property, I thought, oh, well, we'll just split that at some point. And I looked at it and I thought, it's not an easy job. It's not a cheap job. It's not actually something I need to worry about too much at the moment. So I'm not going to do that. So by and large, if you buy a property that has already been split into multiple units, you can pretty much assume that if the services haven't been split already, there isn't a shortcut. There isn't an easy way of just putting in check meters or anything like that. So I think you need to budget for the whole works as I've just described. Significantly, hopefully you now understand how the phrase splitting services, which sounds quite straightforward and relatively cheap, is not so, and how you need to be really, really careful when you look for these opportunities. Make sure that you are budgeting in enough for the works and for the new services, and also factoring in sufficient time to get those works carried out, particularly the external works carried out by the utility providers that to a large extent are outside of your control. So good luck looking for these opportunities. They're definitely out there. I've seen a lot. I've done a good number in my time, but just be aware that you need to budget and factor in the time accordingly. So all the best looking for those kinds of deals and opportunities. And don't be afraid to contact me if you've got further questions relating to this podcast or any of the others I do. I'm more than happy to go into a lot more depth on subsequent podcasts if you've got specific case studies and want me to explain things in more depth. I'd be delighted to hear from you with your questions. I look forward to catching up with you again very soon.
Thanks for listening to this podcast. Please do like, share, and leave a comment where you can. If you need any guidance or advice with anything to do with your refurbishments or conversions, then don't hesitate to reach out. You can book a free call with me by clicking on the link at the top of my website, refurbishmentmastery.com. There's other ways you can contact me in the show notes as well. I look forward to speaking to you again soon.